everyone, thank you for joining me for another monthly wrap-up. We're going to be going over what I read in February. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm your host, Voodoo Pickles, and I hope you guys are all having an amazing day, night, afternoon, whatever it is where you are. So I was pretty excited. We read more in February than I thought I would, especially because it was a short month, and it just kind of flew by. So we read 6 books in February, and pretty awesome. So the first book that we read was Horror Movie, and this was written by Paul Tremblay, and it was an audiobook. It was about 7.5 hours, and this book follows a horror movie, like the title suggests, and all of the things that went on with the horror movie, and you get to know it's split up. There's a story that happened back in the day in the horror movie, which happened I'm going to say in the 90s, maybe late 80s, early 90s-ish. It doesn't really give a time frame, but it happened decades ago, like 2 or 3 decades ago. And then you're following one of the main characters of that horror movie who played the monster, and how he is navigating now because they are going to do a remake of this horror movie. And it goes through all of the conspiracy theories of this horror movie. It goes through what happened, what people are saying about it, and how he's reacting to all of this. And I try not to give away anything. It's an interesting take. If you like the horror movie things, or if you think back on horror movies of real horror movies that they were saying it's curse type thing, and it kind of follows that. And then when you further get into it, you realize it tells you a little bit more. You find out all the things that are happening that aha, I see you there. So it was an interesting read. It was very interesting. It started off one way and I was kind of getting bored, and then it switched up to a different way of telling the story. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is fascinating. Tell me more about this. And the things that happened towards the end of the book, I was like, okay, I see what you were doing here. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Will I read this again? I don't know. Probably not. But it was an interesting read. I can't really say much more than that without giving what I really think of specific issues of the book or specific parts of the book that I either liked or disliked, because that'd be really spoilery. So yeah, I'm not gonna say anything about it. It was okay. It was okay. 3 out of 5. It was okay. Not the worst book I read. Not the best, but it was okay. The second book that we read this month was The Winter People. This is written by Jennifer McMahon, and it's an audiobook, and it was almost 11 hours long. It's 10 hours and 45 minutes. And this one was an interesting one. This one I also picked up from Reddit, from those books that feel like this. It was just on my TBR, so I picked it up. And takes place in a small town, and wintry vibes. There's a snowstorm coming in, and it's just a small town. And this one again is a dual timeline. Except it's more of that. It's a tri timeline type thing. And it's very interesting. We have a book that was written after the thing happened in the past, that has diary entries of the thing that happened in the past that are now influencing the things in the future. But it's following this one family who has a isolated house on the edge of the town, and people start going missing. I mean, it's always kind of been a thing. People have always kind of been going missing. So it's just oh yeah, this is just kind of a thing. We just think they get lost in the woods. And the way that the diary entries in the past affect the future and give you more insight and context to what's going on is really neat. I think that these entries and things were spaced out very well. It was really interesting, and the way that I thought things were going, and then they weren't, and then there was another twist put into it, and I was like, whoa, what happened with this? And then I'm like, oh, aha, Trixie Hobbitses, I get you. get you. And it was an interesting read. Like I said, it's very interesting. It was just really well constructed. Maybe not the best written, maybe not the most like original type ideas, but I did like how it was put together. It was put together in a way that I was really surprised that I would actually really like this. Like there was a part when I was like, okay, I think I know where this is going. And I'm okay with it. It's not my favorite things to happen, but it's okay. I was at work and I was like, I just need something to listen to. And so that's originally why I picked up this book. And so I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't go into it having high expectations of it. I just kind of let the story take me where it willed. And I thought it was pretty good. I gave this a 3.75 out of 5. It's one of those books I may read it again just to catch some other things that I may have missed in the first read through. So it's pretty good. And the third book that we read this month was The Alienist. This is the first book in the Dr. Laszlo Kreisler series, I think. I don't know how many of those are. Maybe I'll look it up. I don't know. I don't know how many of those are, but this was written by Caleb Carr. I read this digitally and it was 544 pages. And I originally picked this up because I have the second book in this series physically in my library. And since I'm trying to read more books physically that I own, I was like, oh, I almost picked this one up to read next. However, I was like, I did not read the first one, The Alienist, which I know was turned into a show on a network. Like Luke Evans was in it. And oh, what's her name? Was it Dakota Fanning? I don't remember. One of them. I know Luke Evans was in it because I saw the picture on the title thing. And so I read this one. This book takes place back in the early 1900s, and it's following a psychiatrist who is Dr. Laszlo Kreisler, who runs an asylum, and he is working with Teddy Roosevelt, yes, the president, or former president, who at the time was the commissioner of the police in New York. And during this time, there was a bunch of murders that were taking place, and nobody was investigating them. Nobody was looking into them. Nobody was really doing anything with them. And that annoyed Teddy Roosevelt and Dr. Laszlo Kreisler. And they roped in their friend, who they all met at Harvard, and they roped him into it. And they start creating a task force to try and figure out what is going on with these murders. And we just go through all this whole investigation of finding out what's going on with these murders. And it goes like a whole behavioral profile of this killer, and they go through developing profile techniques and things. And it's written from the journalist, I think his name is John or James or Jonathan or something like that. Starts with a J. I'm pretty sure I have it written down somewhere. Anyways, it goes from the perspective of him back in the future after Roosevelt's funeral. And he's saying, like, this is the time that people should know about what happened back then. And it goes through all of these racism issues that are going on with these immigrants moving into New York, and these classism issues. And it is very heavy on a lot of assault and murder, and it is very descriptive. So if you want to read this, it's a good book. I really enjoyed the investigation of it. I like those type of procedural shows where, you know, like the old CSIs, the Criminal Minds, those type of shows. So this was just something that I really enjoyed. It showed the murders were gruesome, and then it gave us the whole why and how, and like the background of the killer and everything like that, and just goes through all of this. And it was really good. I really enjoyed it. It does read like it was written a long time ago. So it wasn't published that long ago. It was published in 1994, but it reads like it was written and everything in like the early 1900s. So if you're not familiar with that type of writing, that writing style, it's a little odd to read. But if you stick with it, like the first half is all build up descriptions and building up the world so you have a full understanding of what's going on. The second half of the book is balls to the wall bananas, and it was really good. I give this a 4 out of 5, and I really enjoyed it. And now I'm excited to read the second book I have, which I believe is The Angel of Darkness. And the fourth book that we read this month was My Best Friend's Exorcism. But this was written by Grady Hendrick. I read it physically. It was 332 pages, and I originally saw this because I saw they had a movie on it on Amazon, My Best Friend's Exorcism, and I saw that it takes place like back in the 80s and early 90s, and I was like, I love that. I love that. That is my jam. So I wanted to watch the movie, but I was like, you know what? I heard it's a book and I want to read the book. I found the book, read the book, and it was an interesting thing. So this takes place, like I said, back in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's following a bunch of girls who are in high school. And they're in high school in this smaller town in like the southern part of the States, and they hanging out doing girl things. It's a group of 4 friends. 3 of those 4 friends are like super rich, come from old money. They live on little mansions and everything. They have multiple things. They go to private school. And then one girl who does not come from a very rich family. Her family is going through some hard times, and they had to move into a small, like, rundown house. And she's able to go to the school that her friends are going to because she got a scholarship. She's super smart, does really well in school, and she's just hanging out with her friends. And then one of her friends, her best friend, gets possessed. And we follow this girl trying to help her best friend, and how the other friends end up dealing with this one friend who's possessed, who they don't know she's possessed. Like, the possession thing doesn't really come up, even though they're going to like a Catholic school, which is weird. And so they don't really know what's going on with her, and their interactions with them, it starts building up tension. And the way that this one friend, that interacts with everybody else, it reminds me of the Exorcist book, which I read last year, and how the mother of Reagan was trying to do everything right, trying to do everything by the book right, so that, because she didn't believe in her child being possessed. So she was like, obviously so she didn't believe in her daughter being possessed. So she was like, I need to go to doctors. I need to go do this. That's what this girl was doing. She went to all of the adults in her life, and she tried to explain what was going on. And all of the adults in her life failed her. There was a couple of parts where one of the adults in her life like stood up for her and tried to help out with the situation, but doesn't really happen. And so she's trying to figure out what's going on. And then when she realizes that it may be an exorcism type thing, like she may be possessed, she tries to go down that avenue. And one of the funniest things in this book, I don't know if it's spoilery. No, it's not spoiler. I don't think so. I'm going to tell you anyway. So if you're worried about a spoiler for this book that's been out, maybe the movie, then just skip ahead like 30 seconds. The funniest part about this movie is The Exorcist is a part of a Christian group that goes around visiting high schools and talking about, being a Christian, being a good Christian, and like bringing more people into Christianity. And they do this by being bodybuilders and like doing this like weird routine with how much muscle they have and stuff. And that guy's the Exorcist, and that shit that cracked me up so much when he was in there. And so all of this is the build up to the book. And I realized reading this book, what I enjoyed about the last book I read from Grady Hendrix was The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, was how he writes the helplessness of some of his female characters. I'm just like, wow, no, I feel that. Like, this girl was trying. She was trying so hard to have an adult understand. She didn't really believe in possession or anything either. So she was like, obviously, there has to be a rational explanation for this. And there wasn't. There wasn't. Like, spoilers, the girl was possessed. She needed an exorcism. And her going through all of this process. And then the last chapter of the book actually goes into what happens after. We get a whole epilogue of what happens after and all of the consequences of these actions that are happening, which is really neat. And I really enjoyed that because you don't really see the consequences of those type of actions and what happens. I enjoyed it. I gave this a 3.75 out of 5. I think I'll go back to it. It was a very easy read. And I had some problems with it. Like, it wasn't a great book. I really enjoyed the first book that I read from him more than this one. But it was enjoyable. I enjoyed it. And the fifth book that we read this month was Stiff. This was written by Mary Roach, and it is a nonfiction book. I read this digitally, and it was 304 pages, and I enjoyed this. I originally saw this book because of, again, Reddit. I think Reddit and YouTube. I was watching it and it was recommended on there. This is a nonfiction book, and this person, Mary Roach, got in not an obsession, but she got an interest in what happens to human cadavers after you die. What happens to, what goes on? And this one is following what can happen to a human cadaver, mostly in a scientific and medical exploration. And I've seen some people who've read this and they rate it lower or they don't finish it because it is very graphic of what happens after it. It tells all of these type of things, little anecdotes from people who run or work into like the Kentucky state or the university that's in Kentucky that has the cadaver farm, and also goes through donating your body to medical or scientific research and what it could be used for. And this was fascinating. This was absolutely fascinating. While I was reading this book, there would be a lot of parts where I'm like, well, now I have a question. How much can the human stomach hold before it just... And all of these type of little questions that just pop into my head when I'm reading things, she answers them. So I assume she would have these type of questions as well. So I really enjoyed this book. It was very research heavy, and she went to all of these locations to talk with people who worked in these professions who dealt with these type of things, and it was really neat. I really enjoyed it. Like, it was a really well-written book. It was funny. Like, I laughed a lot. Like, in between some of the stories that she was talking about or what could happen or anything, I was like, she would have this little anecdote, and some of these things that I find funny that people probably won't were funny, and I enjoyed it. It was funny. It was very insightful. It was very well researched. I have a lot of notes on this now, things that I want to look into, and there's a couple of exhibits that I'm like, yeah, no, I want to go to that now. That's pretty great. But I'm also not squeamish, I guess, when it comes to human cadavers or talks about them or very graphic details of what goes on, or death in particular. Like, that none of that really bothers me. So if that bothers you, probably stay away from it. If it doesn't, or if you want to kind of push into what's going on or what could happen, if you do donate your body to science or medical research, this is definitely a good book to read. I really enjoyed it. I definitely want to get this book physically so I can visit back into all of these type of things because, again, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a fascinating book. So I gave this a 4.75 out of 5, and it's going on my list of books to own. I'm really excited about it. The sixth book that we read this month was called These Silent Woods. This was written by Kimmy Cunningham Grant, and I read this physically, and it was about 275 pages, and this one caught my eye because the cover has like this cabin isolated in the woods. And I was like, yeah, I like that. And from the little blurb on the back, it made it sound like it was like Shooter or Jason Bourne, but with like the guy had a kid. And like there's gonna be something that happens and be action packed. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, what if somebody who was in this type of organization left, ran, hid, and is in the middle of the woods with their child, and then something happens to bring them back into light? And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. I would like to read that. Let's go. And that's not what this book is. That is not what this book is. I was shocked when I realized that's not what this book is. This book follows Cooper. Cooper, for some reason, we do get told what the reason is, had to leave society with his daughter, Finch, to be able to keep her with him and to protect her. And so they went out into the middle of the woods, and they were just kind of there, except Cooper served in the military with this guy named Jake. Him and Jake became best friends while they were serving over there. Jake was severely injured in the military. He was blown up and severely injured, and Cooper saved his life. And so they still became friends. They hung out. Even after they both left the military, they were still friends. But they were like guy friends, so like they didn't call each other or anything. They were just like, yeah, that's my friend. And so when Cooper does the thing where he has to take Finch and leave, and just leave their whole lives behind, when she was an infant, he goes to the woods and he's kind of living in a tent. And then he decides that he's going to call Jake, because he's technically on Jake's land. Jake's family owns this plot of land in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. So he calls Jake. Jake shows up, doesn't ask him really any questions, just saying, stay here as long as you need to. Doesn't want to know what he did. He's like, all right, you got this. You guys stay here. And once a year, Jake shows up with supplies so they can make it through the winter and everything. He gets to see them, see how they're doing. And one year, Jake doesn't show up. And that's the catalyst for this whole rest of this book. And I had to say, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't going into this full action-packed, like, CIA, FBI, like, whole cover-up thing and all of that stuff. And so I was a little disappointed. I was a little salty that I felt like I was lied to, even though going back and reading the little blurb on the front and the back, I'm like, oh yeah, no, you didn't lie to me. I misunderstood and assumed what you would be. And I kept reading it and I was just like, okay, I'm getting this guy is so just why? Just why? Except I can't be mad at it too bad, because I know men like this. Like, I understand perfectly why he is doing the things that he's doing and saying the things that he's saying in the way that he's saying them. I'm like, yeah, I know people who are like this. And the way that it just, this whole mystery kind of unfurls around it. And then all of these characters that you had an opinion about because you were given this facet of them towards the end starts changing. And you're like, oh, I didn't know that. And then the characters at the same time are also like, oh, I didn't know that. By the last little quarter of the book, I could not put this down. I was like, well, what happens now? And then there was a thing in there that I was just like, aw, he's so cute. It's so cute. And it was adorable. I thought that thing that happens towards the end, it was just adorable. And the way that the last little quarter of the book, like the first half of the book, I felt like I was lied to, and I was just going through and I was like, all right, I'm reading this. Like, okay, some things are funny. I understand some of the other things. After the middle, I was just like, my dude, why? Why are you like this? Why are you being like this? And then it tells you why. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. I completely understand why you are the way you are. And especially with the way that his characters, like him as a person going through these things. Yeah, it's completely understandable why he is the way he is and why he thinks the way he thinks. Because again, like I said, I've known people like this, and so I'm able to understand more of like, okay, I understand. Do I agree with it? No, but I understand. And then the last quarter of the book where everything just it just continuously goes and goes and goes. And it was a roller coaster of emotions. And I was here for it. I was here for it. It was a book that I was not expecting to like. After I realized that, I was like, oh, I picked it up and it's different than what I thought. And I was annoyed by that, but at the same time, I kept reading it and I was like, wow, this is good. This is really good. And so I gave this a 3.5 out of 5. That review may change when I go back to read it, like sometime down the road. I bought this physically, so it may change, but that's where it's at right now. Like it wasn't bad. Like if I was going into it thinking what it could have been instead of what it was, then probably would have been a little bit better, you know? And I had 2 books that I did not finish. Yeah, I had 2 books. So I had to think for a second. Like, did I? I had 2 books that I did not finish this month. One of them was called Here Lies a Vengeful Bitch, written by Cody Crowley, and I picked this one as an audiobook, and it was about 9.5 hours, and I was expecting different from this. It starts off with this girl, she's like pulling herself out of a river, and I was like, okay, cool. That's pretty interesting. And the back of it, like, it tells, like, here lies a vengeful bitch. Like, from that thing in the cover, she's got the tombstone and everything. And you're like, okay, obviously this is like a type of revenge story, right? Right? That's kind of what you think. It's a revenge story. Like, she was killed and she's going after the person who killed her type thing. Like, okay, I can get behind that. I like that. I think I'd like that kind of book. It was something that I picked up that it wasn't supposed to be serious or anything. It was just, I worked a lot at the beginning of the month, so I was like, I need stories. I need something. And I picked this one up because it's just been on my TBR for a while, and it started off okay. Like, she's coming out of a river. She's having like flashbacks of what's going on. It reminds me of, what's that zombie movie? I think it's just iZombie that was on, I think, Netflix, or there was a TV show that was on. And I enjoyed that show. I really liked it. So I was like, yeah, I can do that. She's coming out of the river. She's doing this. And like, okay. And then she meets other people who are also dead. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's going to expand the lore on this a little bit. It's going to be like this. And then I finished about almost halfway, I think. Like, it was between like 30% and halfway. And I was just like, what in the piss is this? What is this? Like, you keep introducing characters and then not telling me about the characters. And then all the characters sound the same, where I had problems differentiating them, except for the 2 creepy twins. And nobody's telling her that she's dead. Like, we know she's dead. Everybody knows that she's dead. She does not know that she's dead. And they're refusing to tell her because they're like, oh no, what if she can't handle it? I'm like, well, how about you use all these skills that you're using to talk to each other about her, and then talk to her like a person, and, you know, help her through this so she won't disappear from being too shocked that she's dead. Like, the longer you keep pushing this off, the harder it's going to be for her to wrap her mind around it a little bit, you know? And I thought she was older, like, I thought she was in her 20s or something. Like, okay, yeah. No, she's in high school. I'm like, that's so great. You know what I love hearing about? Children in high school. I was like, it's fine. It's fine. It's okay. Maybe it'll be fine. And it wasn't. Like, they let her go off to her high school, and she's trying to, like, be just, I'm mad at this one person. This one person has the answers to all of my questions. And he's just like, she doesn't even ask him any questions. She sees him and then gets sidetracked by the principal. And then she's like, oh no, I have to listen to what the teachers are saying because I came to school after she just told the other dead people that she doesn't know are dead that she's not going to be sitting in the class all day. She'll be like 20 minutes going in and out of this high school to get the answers that she wants. And then her mom is there, and then her mom's like this extra terrible person. I'm like, okay, this author obviously has something against their mother. Like, the way you're talking about her and the fam. Like, okay, there's issues here. And then I kept trying. I kept like pushing myself to listen to it more. But I was just like, this is stupid. That's how I felt with it. I don't know. It may be different for you. Maybe you're taking different things from it. I think I was just expecting something that was better or at least more entertaining. And they all read like they were like 13, which I'm like, what is a 13-year-old going out getting drunk with a senior? And to find out, I don't think she's 13. I think she's like 16 or 17-ish. I don't know. They were all written like they were like 12 or 13 years old. And I was like, I'm not comfortable with that. Like, I'm not comfortable with that. Like, you're writing these children like they're all adults, except stupid adults. And I feel like I deserved better, so I stopped listening to it. But yeah, that was the one I didn't read. And I also didn't finish The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. This is a nonfiction book written by Jonathan Haidt? Sounds weird. But I borrowed this as well. And I started I was reading this digitally. I started reading this, and after getting through the foreword and the introduction and where they're pulling the information from, which is great. Like, I think that should be more in the bibliography instead of you just telling me in your first chapter of where you got all the information from. This is talking about the rewiring of children's brains due to electronics and social media, and how it is causing depression, and how it's causing anxiety, and how the communication skills of the latest generation that were raised on electronics and social media and stuff are changing. Like, the social skills are almost near absent with it, and it's just going through on pretty much what had happened, and they call it the Great Rewiring, because it has rewired a lot of the brains of the younger generation. And I started reading it because I was interested in it, except it was going through information that I already know. And I'm like, it's good information to have, but I already knew it, so I stopped reading it. I got about like 20% into the book, and I was like, all right, that's cool. Thank you. This is all the stuff I know. It may have gotten more in depth later on. It's just I got bored with it, so I stopped reading it. But those were the 6 books that I actually read this month, and then the 2 books that I DNF'd. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have an amazing day, night, afternoon, whatever it is where you are. And what did you guys read? Did you guys read any good books this month? Did you guys listen to anything good? Let me know down in the comments. Wow, I can talk. And don't forget to do all the YouTube things, like, subscribe, all of that stuff. And then in the description below, I'll have a list of all of the books that I read, as well as a link to where you can buy books from your local bookstore, or where you can buy used books through an online website called Thrift Books. And if you are in the United States, where you can find your local library so you can read these for free. And thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. You guys are amazing and awesome, and I appreciate every single one of you. And I'll talk to you guys later.